Jeff's sculptures are mirrors of our aspirations. As the viewer looks at these objects, they amplify the desires and projections that we as humans bestow onto objects. Hello, my name is Massimiliano Gioni. I'm the curator of the exhibition Jeff Koons Lost in America. We are at Riwaq Gallery in Doha. This is Jeff Koons' largest presentation in the Middle East and one of his largest exhibitions ever. He brings together nearly 60 works from over 40 years of his work. It starts off with this great piece from 1980 called The New Jeff Koons, which is incorporating a portrait of the artist when he was 5 years old as a promising artist of the future. The exhibition is conceived as an autobiography of Jeff Koons. As the title suggests, the show doubles both as a self-portrait of the artist and also as a panoramic view of the myth of American culture as it gets reflected and refracted on the work of one of the most influential and controversial artists of today. Follow me, we are going to go through the exhibition, we are going to get lost in Jeff Koons' America and hypnotized by the mirroring surfaces of his work. Jeff Koons was born in Pennsylvania, and his childhood and his upbringing play a very important role in his work. His father was an interior decorator, and Jeff spent his childhood in his father's shop. And he says that in that space he learned how objects could manipulate our emotions. The very first exhibitions that Jeff Koons held in New York when he was a young artist focused on everyday materials and have been described as a kind of conflation of pop art and minimalist forms. As in this case here, you have this very, very clean, perfect, cold design of a tank in which 3 basketball floats mysteriously. It's a piece that Jeff has described in many different ways. You could think of it as cells sort of floating in an amniotic fluid. You could think of them as a womb, as an image of life. But obviously they also allude to America, to the myth of success as achieved through sports and through the invention of the self. It is somewhat intimidating to be standing next to this artwork, which is famously the most expensive piece by a living artist today. It's a work that has really defined the history of contemporary art since 1986, when it was first presented. The title of the work is Rabbit. It's probably Jeff Koons' most legendary piece. It's been described as a sphinx, as a symbol of 1980s consumerism, and throughout the decades he has kept renewing its really hypnotic and fascinating power. So this piece, which is now really a metaphor for luxury, was born simply as an inflatable toy that Jeff has purchased in New York City. At the time, he was buying many of his objects in little souvenirs and gift shops. The piece is cast and then replicated in stainless steel. So first of all, the choice of the material is very unusual because it's not a precious metal. It's not bronze, it's not gold, it's actually stainless steel, which is the material with which typically we make pots and pans. Jeff has described stainless steel as a form of proletarian platinum. It's actually an object that evokes ideas of more aspiration than actual wealth. The reflecting power of these objects is very important. Jeff has said in an interview at the time that these objects do not absorb desire, they reflect it. Jeff's sculptures somehow act almost like cameras. No? They offer a snapshot of the viewer as the viewer looks at these objects. And in doing that, they amplify the kind of ballet of desires and aspirations and projections that we as humans bestow onto objects. This work is titled Bear and Policeman. It's from 1988, and it belongs to the series Banality, which is one of Jeff Koons' most famous series. In these works, Jeff also introduced a new provocation in his work. These are pieces that are made by artisans and by other artists. They were mainly made in northern Italy and in Germany and in Austria. So most explicitly, for the first time in his career, Jeff decided to delegate the creation of his work to other professionals. And in fact, if you look closely at the sculpture, you'll see that the sculpture is signed not by Jeff Koons in the back, by actually the artisan who made the object. And that is a very daring move in the history of art. In this case, Jeff thinks of himself more as a conceptual artist, and that will open the door to many new solutions in his work, as we will see in Celebration. Balloon Dog is one of Jeff Koons' most famous artworks. It belongs to the series Celebration, which the artist begins at the beginning of the 1990s and which still unfolds until today. In this series, Jeff really pushes the boundaries of production of his work, often collaborating with engineers, to realize works that almost seem made without human intervention. Now, the works in Celebration have this otherworldly quality. They look like giant toys. They look like aliens or like UFOs, objects that really stand between the real and the fictional. Balloon Dog is a piece that Jeff has also described as a kind of Trojan horse. He says he hides a secret that he might be hiding, refer perhaps to his own biography. Celebration was conceived when Jeff was separated from his son, and on many levels you could see the series as a way to compensate for the absence of his loved one. But the secret also that Balloon Dog might be hiding is simply the presence of the viewers who are reflected, who search for their image in the shiny surfaces of the polished stainless steel. Jeff has said that the Balloon Dog is also very much about using the viewer as a ready-made, so as transforming the viewer into part of the artwork itself. To my right is Play-Doh. It's a piece that took nearly 20 years to be finished. It's a perfect replica of a mound of Play-Doh made in aluminum and carefully painted. The artist has worked tirelessly for decades to capture the cracks of the Play-Doh, the colors, with really a virtuosistic ability for simulation. I think this is also a very important quality in the work of Jeff Koons and in the work of the Celebration series in particular. This ability to simulate what is apparently worthless and make it extremely valuable by the act of replicating every imperfection. The figure of the child is always central in the work of Jeff Koons. Throughout his work, we as viewers are made small, we are miniaturized, we have the impression of being faced with gigantic toys, and on the other hand, our childhood is somewhat prolonged to infinity. This work is called Triple Popeye. It's from 2008. It's a very important example of Jeff Koons' experimentation with painting. First of all, and most provocatively, we should be reminded that Jeff Koons does not paint his own paintings. The paintings are usually realized with the collaborations of different painters and people working in the studios. If you look at it closely, you won't see brush strokes, you won't see traces of human hands. So just as in his sculptures, you have this feeling of objects that are somehow existing without human involvement. In a painting like this, you see these gestures, like these kind of scribbles that Jeff Jeff compares to the drawings of children or to the drawings and paintings of sight only, but also resembles the movement of a mouse pad. The painting is made much more complicated and rich because it combines a feeling of mechanical reproduction and a very labor-intensive process of painting and layering. The figure of Popeye appears in Jeff's work in multiple pieces around 2008, 2007. Popeye was a hero, particularly of Jeff's father. It's a figure that Jeff connects with a certain image of old-fashioned America. Popeye's motto is, "I am what I am." And in that sense of self-acceptance, as Jeff defines it, Popeye becomes also a leader for Jeff's cult of the everyday, for his appreciation of the world and people as they are. This piece is called Hulk Friends, and it's one of Jeff Koons' tour de force in the realm of simulation and imagination. It's a piece that perfectly resembles a blow-up toy, an inflatable of Hulk, but it is in fact made in bronze. So what appears to be incredibly light and just a film of plastic is in fact as heavy as a few tons and as massive and powerful as the Hulk himself would be. You could describe all his work as an attempt to transform the valueless into the valuable, and vice versa, also to make the extremely valuable feel valueless. In this paradox, Jeff Koons is also revealing something about the way we project meanings onto everyday commodities. This piece is titled Balloon Venus. It belongs to the series Antiquity. It's a piece in which Jeff starts looking back at the history of art, and in this case reaches all the way to Paleolithic sculptures, to the Venus of Willendorf or the Venus of Lespuge. When in an exhibition by Jeff Koons, it's always very interesting to see the reaction of the public. The public searches for their own image in the reflection, take photos of their own image. And so these objects really become part of a community. They become part of a ritual of participation that is very much central in the way in which Jeff Koons thinks about his own work and about his own sculptures. The gazing balls are a series that have defined Jeff's work in the last decades. They are inspired by garden decorations in suburban America and in his native Pennsylvania, where people put reflective balls on their lawns, in their gardens. Jeff was always very much taken by how such a simple gesture was an act of generosity to neighbors, to passers-by. This idea that you decorate your private space as a gift to people walking by was very important and interesting for him. But on the other hand, the gazing ball is also an object that dates back all the way to the Renaissance. The sculptures range from again, store-bought souvenirs or everyday objects to sculptures of antiquity. So again, they participate in this reflection around simulation, around the copy and the original. The paintings are among some of Jeff Koons' strangest objects. They are replicas of historical works, in this case a work by Turner or Leonardo or Poussin and Rubens, and they are copies that are made with maniacal precision. If you look at it, you'll see that the painting is done in such a way as to replicate the cracks of the original oil painting, and then on top of them he places this gazing ball, this glass crystal sphere, which also replicates the image of the viewer that this way gets incorporated into the painting itself. This piece is titled Ballet Couple. It's one of the more recent works. It dates from 2019, and it's a sculpture that replicates a small ceramic object. Jeff Koons has spoken often about little objects in the house of his grandfather. In this case, we have a large copy of a small ceramic, which is actually made in marbles, which then is painted to simulate the finish of ceramics. Again, Jeff Koons plays with simulation, plays with transforming the feeling of a precious material like marble into a less precious material such as the ceramic. Party Hat is the most recent piece in the exhibition, and it's really a privilege to have the opportunity to present it in the context of this show. It's a work that took 25 years to be completed because of its engineering, because of its level of precision and simulation. If you look at the rim of the party hat, it's almost a Baroque sculpture into itself, and also you have a sense of perceiving your own body differently and almost discovering your own body in relation to the sculpture. But this idea of time is also very present, a kind of ritualistic quality in these objects that would be part of a children's birthday party. And so they are also objects that somehow mark this passing of time. They are objects that participate in rituals of transformation, in the process of growth. And once again, the figure of the child comes to play a very important role in Jeff Koons' work.